Well, welcome back after an hour or two off to rest. When we last left off, we were talking about um, the how do you describe the difference between Adam and the other man? We had the factitious man. And then we had the human whom God made and placed in the garden to tend it. We talked about the difference between those two. We talked about sober intoxication. Uh, let's see, what else did we talk about? Oh, we talked about the stones, how uh, Judah and Issachar um, were the uh, carbuncle and the emerald. And these two represented Judah and Issachar. Remember, God in the Bible, in one of the more complicated books of the Bible, only complicated because people refuse to accept the fact that the Bible was allegory. Um, there was the garment that God commanded the priest to make that was to contain stones in it. And by understanding who these stones represent, we will then understand the purpose behind the laying of the stones in the garment. And so we were going over the stones. We went over the different rivers. We went over the second river, which was Gihon, which symbolized courage. The third river was Tigris, which symbolized temperance. And the fourth river was the Euphrates, which symbolized fertility and more than that, justice. We're going to continue now as God continues, or as Philo continues discussing God's command that every tree in paradise Adam and Eve were able to freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil they were commanded not to eat. We continue now with point number 90. And the Lord God commanded Adam, saying, Of every tree that is in the paradise thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. But in the day on which you eat of it you shall die the death. A question may arise here to what kind of Adam he gave this command and who this Adam was. For Moses has not made any mention of him before, but now is the first time that he has named him. And are we then to think that he is desirous to supply you with the name of the factitious man? And he calls him, continues Moses, earth, for this is the interpretation of the name of Adam. Accordingly, when you hear the name Adam, you must think that he is an earthly and perishable being. For he is made according to an image, being not earthly, but heavenly. But we must inquire how it was that after he had given names to all of the other animals, he did not give one also to himself. What then are we to say about this? The mind which is in each of us is able to comprehend all other things, but has not the capability of understanding itself. For as the eye sees all other things but cannot see itself, so also the mind perceives the nature of other things but cannot understand itself. For if it does, let us tell it what it is, or what kind of thing it is, whether it is a spirit, or blood, or fire, or air, or any other substance, or even only so much whether it is a substance at all, or something incorporeal. Are not those men then simple who speculate on the essence of God? For how can they who are ignorant of the nature of the essence of their own soul have any accurate knowledge of the soul of the universe? For the soul of the universe is, according to our definition, God. It is therefore very natural that Adam, that is to say the mind, when he was giving names to and displaying his comprehension of the other animals, did not give a name to himself, because he was ignorant of himself and of his own nature. A command indeed is given to man, but not the man created according to the image and idea of God. For that being is possessed of virtue without any need of exhortation by his own instinctive nature. But this other would not have wisdom if it had not been taught to him. And these three things are different: command, prohibition, and recommendation. For prohibition is conversant about errors, and is directed to bad men, but command is conversant about things rightly done. Recommendation, again, is addressed to men of intermediate character, neither bad nor good. For such a one does not sin so that any one has any need to direct prohibition to him, nor does he do right in every case in accordance with the injunction of right reason. But he is in need of recommendation, which teaches him to abstain from what is evil, and exhorts him to aim at what is good. Therefore there is no need of addressing either command, or prohibition, or recommendation to the man who is perfect, and made according to the image of God. For the perfect man requires none of these things, but there is a necessity of addressing both command and prohibition to the wicked man, and recommendation and instruction to the ignorant man. Just as the perfect grammarian or perfect musician has need of no instruction in the matters which belong to his art, but the man whose theories on subjects are imperfect stands in need of certain rules, as it were, which contain in themselves commands and prohibitions, and he who is only learning the art requires instruction. Very naturally, therefore, does God at present address commands and recommendations to the earthly mind, which is neither bad nor good, but of an intermediate character. And recommendation is employed in the two names, in that of the Lord and of God. For, for the Lord God commanded that if man obeyed his recommendations, he should be thought worthy of receiving benefits from God. But if he rejected his warnings, he should then be cast out to destruction by the Lord, as his master and one who had authority over him. On which account, when he is driven out of paradise, Moses repeats the same names. For he says, "And the Lord God sent him forth out of the paradise of happiness, to till the ground from which he had been taken." That, since the Lord had laid his commands on him as his master, and God as his benefactor, he might now in both these characters chastise him for having disobeyed them. For thus, by the same power by which he had exhorted him, does he also banish him, now that he is disobedient. And the recommendations that he addresses to him are as follows. Of every tree that is in the paradise thou mayest freely eat. He exhorts the soul of man to derive advantage not from one tree alone, nor from one single virtue, but from all the virtues. For eating is a symbol of the nourishment of the soul. And the soul is nourished by the reception of good things, and by the doing of praiseworthy actions. And Moses not only says, "Thou mayest freely eat," but he adds freely also, that is to say, having ground and prepared your food, not like an ordinary individual, but like a wrestler, you shall thus acquire strength and vigor. For the trainers recommend the wrestlers not to cut up their food by biting large pieces off, but to masticate it slowly, in order that it may contribute to their strength. For I and an athlete are fed in different manners. For I feed merely for the purpose of living, but the wrestler feeds for the purpose of acquiring flesh and deriving strength from it. On which account one of his rules of training and exercise is to masticate his food. This is the meaning of the expression, "Thou mayest freely eat." Again, let us endeavor to give a still more accurate explanation of it. To honor one's parents is a nourishing and cherishing thing, but the good and wicked honor them in different manners. For the one does it out of habit, as men eat who do not eat freely, but who merely eat. When, then, do they also eat freely? When, having investigated and developed the causes of things, they form a voluntary judgment that this is good. And the causes of their eating freely, that is to say, of their honoring their parents in a proper spirit, is, they become our parents, they nourished us, they instructed us, they have been the causes of all good things to us. Again, To honor the living God is spoken of symbolically as to eat, but to eat freely is when it is done with a proper explanation of the whole matter, a correct assignment of the causes of it. But the tree of the knowledge of good and evil he shall not eat. Therefore this tree is not in the paradise, for God encourages them to eat of every tree that is in the paradise. But when he forbids them to eat of this tree, it is plain that it is not in the paradise. And this is in accordance with natural philosophy, for it is there in its essence, as I have said before, and it is not there in its power. For as in wax there are potentially many seals, but in actual fact only one which has been carved on it, so also in the soul, which resembles wax, all impressions whatever are contained potentially, but in really one single characteristic which is stamped upon it has possession of it, until it is effaced by some other which makes a deeper and more conspicuous impression. Again, this also may be made the subject of a question. When God recommends men to eat of every tree in the paradise, he is addressing his exhortation to one individual. But when he forbids him to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, he is speaking to him as many. For in the one case he says, Thou mayest freely eat of all, but in the second instance, You shall not eat. And in the day in which you shall eat, not thou shalt eat, and you shall die, not thou shalt die, we must therefore say this, that the first good is rare, imparted to but few, but the evil is comprehensive. On this account it is a hard matter to find one single man wise and faithful. But the number of bad men is beyond all computation. Very appropriately, therefore, God does not address his exhortation to nourish oneself amid the virtues to one individual, but he encourages many to abstain from extravagant wickedness, for innumerable men are addicted to it. In the second place, for the due comprehension and adoption of virtue, man requires one thing alone, namely, reason. But the body not only does not cooperate in it at all, but rather impedes the progress of the reason towards it. For it may be almost called the peculiar task of wisdom to alienate itself from the body and from the corporeal appetites. But for the enjoyment of evil, it is not only necessary for a man to have mind in some degree, but also senses and reason and a body. For the bad man has need of all these things for the completion of his own wickedness. Since how will he be able to divulge the sacred mysteries unless he has the organ of voice? And how will he be able to indulge in pleasures if he be deprived of the belly and the organs of sensation? Very properly, therefore, does Moses address reason alone on the subject of the acquisition of virtue. For reason is, as I have said before, the only thing of which there is need for the establishment of virtue. But for indulgence in vice a man requires many things, soul, and reason, and the external senses of the body, for it is through all these organs that vice is exhibited. Accordingly God says, In the day in which you eat of it, you shall die the death. And yet though they have eaten of it, they not only do not die, but they even beget children, and are the causes of life to other beings besides themselves. What then are we to say? Surely that death is of two kinds, the one being the death of the man, the other the peculiar death of the soul. Now the death of the man is the separation of his soul from his body, but the death of the soul is the destruction of virtue and the admission of vice. And consequently God calls that not merely to die, but to die the death, showing that he is speaking not of common death, but of that peculiar and especial death which is the death of the soul, buried in its passions and in all kinds of evil. And we may almost say that one kind of death is opposed to the other kind, for the one is the separation of what was previously existing in combination, namely, of body and soul. But this other death, on the contrary, is a combination of them both, the inferior one, the body, having the predominance, and the superior one, the soul, being made subject to it. When, therefore, God says to die the death, you must remark that he is speaking of that death which is inflicted as punishment, and not of that which exists by the original ordinance of nature. The natural death is that one by which the soul is separated from the body, but the one which is inflicted as a punishment is when the soul dies according to the life of virtue, and lives only according to the life of vice. Well, therefore, did Heraclitus say this, following the doctrine of Moses, for he says, "We are living according to the death of those men, and we have died according to their life," as if he had said, "Now, when we are alive, we are so, though our soul is dead and buried in our body, as if in a tomb. But if it were to die, then our soul would live according to its proper life, being released from the evil and dead body to which it is bound." End of the Allegorical Interpretation, Book 1 by Philo. These videos will be continued in Allegorical Interpretation, Book 2, in the next video.